Hi, welcome. I'm really happy to be here today, and I'd like to thank the Chief for his welcome to the territory. I'd also like to thank my ancestors for the strength and the courage that they had to allow me to still be here today. That's one of the myths, of course, that's out there, that Indigenous people no longer exist, but here we are, just right in front of you. And also for my children for going without me many, many times so I can do the work that I do, both here and at home. So the first slide I'll show you, whether it comes up or not, is one about knowledge, and knowledge is power. There's no question that knowledge, there we go, knowledge is power, and this is one of my teachings, is that you always have to place yourself in the space and let the people that you're talking to know where you come from and what you're about, and this is what I'm about, is knowledge and spreading knowledge to knowledge is power, and helping Indigenous people move from just simply being survivors but to being thrivers. And those are my great nieces, and they're super cute, and they are doing phenomenal in school. So another thing that's very important, and I'm sure you've seen this when it comes up, the Nelson Mandela quote about education, and that how education is one of the strongest tools in the world, or the strongest weapon that's been used to change the world. And there's no question, whether that's in Canada, whether in Indigenous communities, or whether amongst immigrants or in other countries around the world, education is the key. This next slide is, there we go. Lester B. Pearson is a former Prime Minister of Canada, as well as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, just under, actually, December 11th. It'll be a 60-year anniversary of his Nobel Peace Prize. I attended Pearson College, so this is partly why I'm very familiar with this quote. But this is a grounding, or this is one of the underlying things of what I think when we talk at the city of Vancouver, is that how can there be peace without understand, or how can you think I should know this by now? How can there be peace without people understanding each other, and how can this be if they don't know each other? And that's a simple human connection. We have to know each other to be able to understand each other. If we don't know each other, it's simply not going to happen. We won't achieve anything without everyone in the room and being completely inclusive. Sorry, one thing I forgot with the little slide bit here is I'm not representing the city. I do not work for the city of Vancouver. I work for BCIT, as was said earlier, but I've spent probably the last 10 years or so kind of working for the city of Vancouver. Maybe I need to get paid going forward, but very happily so to work with the city. The city of Vancouver has certainly it helps with the Olympics. In 2010, of course, you saw the 4 host nations and the significant involvement of the 4 host nations within the 2010 Olympics. But of course, there was involvement prior to that. But the 2010 Olympics and the 4 hosts certainly really prompted the city of Vancouver to think, what else do we need to do? The Olympics are done, they're over, what do we do? And this started the Dialogues Project, which was about a 3-year-long project that was aimed at strengthening connections between Indigenous people and immigrants, and not just immigrants people, but also all the organizations and partners and all of the groups that deal with settlement agencies like Mosaic and Success. Food banks where sadly a lot of people attend, First Nations organizations that are frontline workers delivering services, all the way up to the chiefs and councils, all the way to the diversity people at the banks. So a whole wide cross-section of people were involved in this. And of course, it was also had the support of the mayor. So I'll go through a few of our initiatives, and then I'll talk about the challenges and some of the keys to our success. So I'll go quite fast. You can Google all of these things, and I know the PowerPoints will be available. So you can look at it's all on the City of Vancouver's website. So the dialogue circles was probably one of the initial things that began. It was simply getting a whole bunch of people together in small groups, different cross-section of people, and again, that understanding, actually getting to meet somebody who perhaps is an immigrant. Many First Nations people never meet immigrants. So getting people together in a safe space, being able to share their stories, and it began with 120 participants, and then that kind of led to other initiatives and other ideas. The community research was another thing that we decided to do. Where are we as Vancouver? You can see the statistics there. Many viewed we were a welcoming city, but of course the number is significantly lower in terms of a welcoming city towards Indigenous people, as well as relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Cultural exchange visits, again, you can meet people at a table and have a discussion, but you need to actually experience the culture on all sides. So you can see there was visitations to the Ismaili Center, to Success, again to Mosaic, to the First Nations Mother Center in Vancouver, to the 3 First Nations that are in the local area, to all variety of, First Nations, Downtown Eastside Health Authority, to the Battered Women Support Services. So there was all of these organizations and visits that happened, and certainly one of the things that came out of it was that in many ways there's a very similar experience in terms of marginalization, particularly with women, Indigenous women and immigrant women, and people started to see some of the similarities and how they could probably work together and support each other. This was a great project. I tried to find a book and bring it with me, but this was a Youth Invoice, a photo kind of project that elders and youth put together that are immigrant elders as well as Indigenous elders and non-Indigenous youth as well. So, and it was done through photos, and people were given cameras and they were given display and actually put into a book. So again, I'm going really fast. These are brilliant initiatives that I'm not doing justice to. So I really encourage, because I thought what we have to offer is what our challenges were and how we did it. So storytelling project, again, it's another where people told their stories, immigrant and Indigenous stories, told them, discussed them, displayed them. There was art, there was all kinds of different things like that. So it was, and it was put up in various city places and organizations. So if you were one of the 49, there was about 49 consistent organizations and groups involved, you would have one of those displays. There was a map, they could go and visit these types of things. So. Youth Summit, of course, that's very important. As Indigenous people, we're the fastest growing population in this country. We have over 55% of our population is under the age of 30. That's very significant when you consider the demographics of the rest of Canada, and of course the immigrant population that is coming in as well. So anything to do with youth, to get them, the sooner they can understand and meet others that are different than them, the better chance of success we have, and to avoid some of the stuff that you mentioned as well around violence and those types of challenging choices that some of our children make. Project highlights 9,000 people in over 3 years, 49 organizations and partners, 3 books published, 1 in Chinese. I think there is one now also in a South Asian language, 2 documentary videos, youth engagement, and a whole pile of events. And of course, this led to us doing many, many more events. And again, I'm going very fast, I'm sorry. We were named ourselves the City of Reconciliation in 2014, which was very significant. That lasted for a year, and there was very targeted initiatives that happened throughout that year, and there was many, many celebrations. And it was kind of a launch to the next phase of our commitment to Indigenous people. And I'm saying but I'm not. I'm a citizen of Vancouver. Again, I don't work for the City of Vancouver. So one of the things that was needed as well was a guide for newcomers. This is available online at the City of Vancouver. You can download it for free. Please do. The idea of the guide is to create something that was accessible to immigrants, written at a very lower level of English, grade 5, grade 6 level of English, lots of photographs. And it explains Vancouver and the place and space of Indigenous people in Vancouver to newcomers. We are looking at this guide too and starting to use it overseas before they come, because it is downloadable. That's one of the new initiatives that we've been talking about. So again, have a look at the guide, and it's something certainly that can be adapted to other cities, and you can download it, so have a look. From the guide, the City of Vancouver is committed to educating and creating awareness for all of its staff and all of its employees. So we created 3 modules. This is just the 3rd one. The second one is on colonization, and there's one on, again, place and space of Indigenous people in historical and contemporary Canada. So those are going to be mandatory for all city staff to do, from the person who collects the garbage to the city planner to I have my email ready for some of the council members, because it's almost ready to go live. So, and I'll be sure to ask Mayor Robertson, have you completed it yet or not? So that's a new initiative at the city. Another one, of course, Canada 150 plus. Instead of celebrating Canada's 150, we celebrated Canada's 150 plus. That did take some negotiation with the federal government to do, but again, very specific, targeted initiatives that demonstrated that Indigenous people have a significant place in Canada, a significant place in Vancouver, and that immigrants are welcome. And all of these events, we had those 49 organizations. There's probably more like 60. Every single organization's clients, staff, the people they work with were invited to all of these initiatives. So just because it's gathering of canoes doesn't mean it wasn't exclusive. Everybody was invited. The whole idea is that everybody's always invited to participate. One of the significant things that we've done is Walk for Reconciliation. It's our second one. We just did this past September, and we had over 50,000 people. And again, the representation comes from across the board. It's not just Indigenous people, it's all kinds of people from all kinds of classes, all kinds of areas, all kinds of interests, and people formed teams, they worked together, they gathered, there's gathering before, gatherings after. It was a very powerful event. And we'll continue to do it. My cousin runs that organization, and I said, "Are we doing it next year?" And her eyes kind of, she kind of like, "Oh my gosh," because it just happened about a month ago. So I'll ask her in January when the next one is. Other initiatives, of course, citizenship ceremonies held at the Musqueam First Nation, new teaching materials, the guide, and other books and things that were published are used for our LINK instructors, which are the instructors that most often teach immigrants. There's an Aboriginal Advisory Committee, and one of the new initiatives too is starting to have visits now, so we can, an organization, so whether it's a settlement organization or whether it's a health organization in Vancouver, that we'll arrange and support, provided they've done the cultural awareness training. The second phase is a kind of one-on-one visit with the local First Nations. And likely we'll start with Musqueam, because Musqueam has been very keen to do this. They just confirmed kind of last week that they would do this. So some of the challenges. This is the one that I think all of us are it's difficult. There's no question. We've seen the other speakers talk about how difficult this is. Lack of time and lack of funds on everybody's part. So nobody has enough time and none of us have enough money. Whether you're a public post-secondary institution, whether you're a settlement organization, whether you're a food bank, whether you're a First Nations community, none of us have enough time, none of us have enough funds. So the obvious thing to do is, why don't we work together? And who has what strengths, who is an expert in this, and so that's one of the things that really worked when we started to embark on this road was, okay, well, who can take care of this? And I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce too, Nadia Carvella, who's the director of Vancouver Immigration Partnership. So she chaired one of the tables where, again, people that had particular interest in governance, perhaps, or a particular interest in outreach and whatnot, then you build on people's strengths, but while connecting and keeping them in the loop in other areas. A lack of buy-in on all sides, that's extremely important, and that goes all the way from the mayor all the way down to the person who does pick up the garbage from the cans, to the First Nations as well. You want people who are homeless people, or people who are, First Nations people who are challenged in many ways. You want them to also be involved. You want, all the way up to the chiefs and councils or the various organizations that we have. So getting buy-in is extremely important from all of the groups. Overcoming bias, myths, and stereotypes we saw from what was mentioned earlier about some of the misconceptions, and it doesn't do well with those books that, I can't remember a guy named Kurt, I can't remember the name, they're Czechoslovakian books or German books that people read about Indigenous people in the Americas. What are they called? Carl Mayne books, that's right. I always forget his name. But I remember seeing those books, and so there's a lot of bias, myths, and stereotypes that must be overcome. And of course, people come with those from their own countries, and Canadians as well have that. It's only now that we're really starting to discuss with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that Indigenous history and reality is coming to light. Very time-consuming, of course. It says on there, we forget about it, that it's about building a relationship. It's not about going in and checking the box, done, I consulted with them, done, now I'm going to make a plan, now I'm going to implement the plan. It's about building a relationship that's sustainable, and when people forget that that's what it's about, then that's when the process often stops. And that the relationship building continues not only during the times that we meet, but outside as well. If you're having an event, send the invitation to everybody. If you have a question and you want to ask, well, ask people. You know, a lot of emails go back and forth, a lot of groups and like that is very, very important. Of course, getting buy-in again, why should we do this? The size of groups can be huge. The diversity of Indigenous people can cause problems, and then people's own personal politics. You know, at one time we had 3 organizations that dealt with battered women in Vancouver, and they fought amongst themselves. So, and that's not only in Vancouver. So it's letting the politics and keeping the focus at the forefront is most important. And how this is not going to be new to you or rocket science to you, but listen, be intentional, be authentic. The Indigenous 4 R's, remember those: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. Must always include those with lived experiences. You should not make a decision about a particular group of people without somebody who has that lived experience being involved. Make it a legitimate priority, not just one to get elected or not just one to check the box or to look as though you're doing great. Be open, transparent, sustainable, and then the big one, communicate, communicate, communicate. And then I just have 2 other slides, which are, I'm sure you've seen before, but I think are absolutely vital. And on an individual basis and also within our work, is we must be aware of our unconscious bias. If you can't read it, it says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb the tree. Clearly, we know who's going to win and get the A+ on the exam, and we know who's going to fail that exam. So as one of the things that we need to do is ask ourselves, what are our biases? And just because I'm Indigenous doesn't mean I don't have biases either. So I also need to recognize my privilege. The fact that all of us are in this room shows that we have some kind of privilege. So it's extremely important to remember that and to recognize that and acknowledge that as well. And then for me, it's about equity. It's not about equality. My background is in law. I practiced criminal justice for criminal law as defense counsel for quite a long time. And people often talk about equality and we often talk about justice. But really what we need is equity. Yeah. Everybody needs to have the same opportunities and the tools that they need to be able to achieve what it is they want to achieve. Our toolboxes will all be very different, but the fact is we all need to be given a toolbox with the tools that we need in order to have that same result. Thank you.